Ben Conniff, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Ben, I'd love to hear about how Luke's Lobster came to be. You answered a Craigslist ad, and now you're running this global seafood empire. Can you walk us through that journey from writer to restaurant co-founder?
Yeah, sure. So at the time, I was 24 years old. I was living in New York City, and I had started out my career looking to get into journalism. I had done some internships and jobs at magazines. I'd done some freelance writing. I'd started to focus on food writing because it just was what I was most passionate about. I loved cooking and I loved eating, but I realized that I actually liked being hands-on, making things more than I liked writing about them. So I was on Craigslist looking for any restaurant job that I could find in New York City. They were really hard to come by in 2008, 2009, in the middle of the recession. And then I stumbled on a post from a guy who was my age, who was working an investment banking job, but who'd grown up in the lobster industry in Maine. And he had come up with a business idea to work with his family's seafood business, which processed some of the best lobster meat anywhere in the world, and to get seafood from that business directly down into a casual little lobster shack in New York that could serve a better lobster roll than anyone was serving at the time for a much lower price, because we do it in an authentic coastal shack atmosphere and not a fancy white tablecloth restaurant. So that was 2009. We met, we hit it off, we decided to go 1,000,000 miles an hour to get it open. And just about 6 weeks after we met, we had signed a lease and built out a tiny little 250 square foot space in the East Village, and we were slinging lobster rolls. It was a wild time, crazy amount of work, but a lot of fun, and we were just so excited to see how it resonated with people and how they flooded in, and how much they loved what we were doing, that we decided, you know what, Luke should quit his day job, we should go open a second one of these, and that happened 7 months later. Third, 5 months after that, and from there we just said, let's keep going, let's try another city, let's make this big, let's get this amazing Maine lobster around the country. And that took us to DC, to Philadelphia, to Boston, started to move westwards to Chicago. At a certain point, really around 2012, we decided that we needed to have our own lobster processing facility that was devoted to our restaurant business, rather than relying on Luke's dad's business, which served a ton of different customers. So we started a facility of our own, and that was the first time we really got back to Luke's home of Maine. We started a facility in Saco, Maine, where we would cook, pick, and pack our own lobster meat, and that opened in 2013. That allowed us to just keep growing the restaurants without missing a beat in terms of the quality of our seafood, while still cutting out the middlemen and getting lobster directly from the source. We opened our first licensed location abroad in 2015. That was with amazing partners in Tokyo, who came over and spent a couple of years really learning with us out on lobster boats, in the plant, in the restaurants, making sure they nailed the brand from A to Z. And so when they opened in Tokyo, that was really huge for us and super successful. And then the other really big step that we took, now that we had this plant infrastructure and we used much but not all of the products that you can make from a lobster in the shacks, we decided we need to have supermarket relationships in order to make the best, highest use of everything that comes from the lobster. So we started a relationship with Whole Foods initially, selling lobster tails, and they helped guide us towards the creation of frozen prepared meals. So now our CPG business is actually a huge part of what we do, and we're making frozen lobster mac and cheese, frozen lobster ravioli, lobster bisque, lobster cakes, and just selling twin lobster tails in branded Luke's Lobster packages in supermarkets around the country. Mm-hmm. And so that's been kind of the most recent pivot for us to really become a whole other branch of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ben, you give us a lot. There's a lot to unpack here, so I'm just going to rewind right back to the early days. So first thing that struck me as kind of incredible is immediately 30 days after signing the lease, you opened the first location. So, it sounds really incredible. Like, what was the first few weeks like? Were you not sleeping at all? Were you guys running purely on adrenaline? And then how can you immediately start a second location after 7 months? Was it just so amazing that you couldn't keep up with the demand from that one location? That sounds like, really quick.
Yeah, we didn't sleep for that first month. It was really, Luke had his day job, so he was off at the office 10 hours a day. He would come by nights and weekends to help. I spent a bunch of time on Google trying to figure out how to do what we needed to do, how to get restaurant licenses, how to get building permits, aligning the contractors that we did use, which were basically plumbing and electrical, and we did everything else by hand. Painting. Luke's uncle came down and helped with carpentry for the tables and things like that. His brother would come up from DC on the weekends and help out with painting, and his brother's friend painted a mural for us. So it was just a lot of really hands-on grassroots work without much professional help at all. And then at the same time, I was writing press releases and reaching out to my old press contacts and off on Craigslist trying to find a team who could be ready to actually make the lobster rolls and serve the guests alongside me on the first day. No sleep, just kind of constant work. But it was September, and we all kind of agreed that folks think most about lobster rolls in the warmer months. So if we didn't get the restaurant open in October, we were going to be off into winter time, and that would be a much harder time to launch this business. Mm-hmm. And we definitely didn't have enough cash to last through until the following spring. So we just kind of needed to make it happen.
Yeah.
And then, I guess, seeing it go so well, seeing it be so popular, I think Luke was really yearning to leave his banking desk and come be a part of this thing that we were making together and get to do it full time. And it helped him justify that, to know that he was going to double the capacity of ownership over here, and by doing that allow us to create this second location, and that was in the Upper East Side, which was a neighborhood that he knew pretty well. And it all just clicked. We found a really great location that Luke's dad actually sniffed out while he was down visiting from Maine, and things just seemed to align. And our team in the original location, the East Village, was just so strong and so passionate and able to run that operation without us being there constantly, and that really motivated us to grow a second location and expand the team.
I kind of want to understand the secret sauce and how something like this can be so successful so fast. If you try to break down some of the variables here, one of the variables is Luke's connections in Maine to the lobster industry. Like if you were to kind of take 100% and assign a percentage to the factors that contributed to the initial 7 months explosion, how would you distribute amazing lobster coming from Maine due to Luke's connections, your food writing background, somehow I imagine positioning this in a very desirable way in New Yorkers' minds? That's a second factor. Maybe a third factor is, as real estate people say, which I know nothing about, location. Were the locations like so favorable to spread of word of mouth spreading or something like that? How would you kind of like going back to the early days look at those factors?
I think you have to attribute over 50% to Luke's traditional heritage in the industry, his multi-generations of knowledge of lobster and seafood, and the fact that his dad was actively producing the best seafood that you could get right then. That allowed us to get the quality of product that we needed at the price that we needed to make this an approachably priced lobster roll for people. But also, that gave me the story that I needed to do that press outreach. You know, you can't, if you don't have a good story, it doesn't matter how good you are at writing press releases, you're not going to get anybody interested. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we had somebody who was a third generation lobsterman who really knew that industry and whose dad knew exactly how to make the best seafood, and who happened to be living in New York in an investment banking job and just itching to do something else, that was a great story. And that story sold itself. All I needed to do was email the right people. So, yeah, I think that connection to the industry, that knowledge of seafood, and that story are all sort of part of one package. That was a huge part of that success. The next most important thing, I would say, was our team and how we worked with our team. We were very lucky to just find some extraordinary individuals who joined us on that very first day. And I think because Luke and I were not restaurant industry professionals, the way we approached our relationship with our team was, you all know as much or more about what's going to happen in this business than we do. And you are the ones who are going to be face-to-face with the guests and have your hands on the product. We need to hear your feedback, and we need you to direct us on how we evolve this business. Mm-hmm. So from day one, it was very much a flat organization, and we empowered that team, and they took on that challenge of really feeling like owners of the business and being willing to speak up and tell us what was working and what wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And having that super engaged team and being open to their feedback and being willing to change based on what they told us really made us successful. Because when that team's engaged, they enjoy being there, they enjoy being with one another, they love the job, and that's infectious to the guests. The guests come in and they see a team that loves being there, that's passionate, and that's having a good time. That's how the guest feels as well. Mm-hmm. So team was absolutely the number two most important thing. And then beyond that, location, it was important. That very first location, even though after 10 years when that lease was up, the kind of attention that we'd gotten there had burned out. In that moment, that block of East 7th Street in Manhattan was on fire. Mm-hmm. With all sorts of these very small box restaurants that specialized in one thing and did that one thing better than anybody else in the city did it. We had the best arepas in the city on that block. We had the best porchetta sandwich on that block. We had the best cupcakes on that block. And so being able to get all that kind of food media and just food enthusiasm focused on that block was really helpful for us to get a lot of attention, a lot of positive energy.
Mm-hmm. And now you're making me miss New York again. We moved out of New York to come to Rhode Island, which is great because we get to surf a lot. But now you just reminded me of like what an incredible melting pot New York is, with the best of everything. The standards are so high, especially food-wise. But so, since you assigned over 50% to the lobster, let's talk about that a little bit more. So, went to Maine, as I told you before, for your lobstering trip. We got to learn a little bit about some interesting things. One of them was the licensing for commercial lobstering is actually pretty hard. Like, you have to kind of get on a wait list for years, decades maybe, to actually do this. So clearly, not anybody can start a lobstering business. There's just a lot of guardrails around it. So that immediately kind of strikes me as a moat. It seems like you guys are benefiting from that. But then also let's talk about the Maine lobster's taste. So why is it so much better than the other lobsters elsewhere. So I was kind of reading this book called, I think it was called like The Last Lobster in Maine or something like that. Just the water temperatures being really favorable, but also there was like several chapters of discussion about, global warming kind of contributing to, and then we had spent some time in Nova Scotia there during the summer, and we're kind of like trying to learn about the lobsters in Nova Scotia, lobsters in Maine, lobsters in Rhode Island, lobsters in New York, but like no longer because the water got so warmer or something, the lobsters moved up north. So I was kind of like, can you kind of tell us what's the deal with the lobster taste, water temperature, and location? And is it really truly the best tasting lobster in the world in Maine?
It definitely is the best tasting lobster in the world, for sure. And a lot of that is the cold, clean water that we have here. Cold, obviously, just a function of the temperature of the Gulf of Maine. And yes, that has warmed recently, but surprisingly enough, the new climate change models are showing the Gulf of Maine potentially getting colder in the future. And that's complicated, but it's basically because with the ice caps melting from the north, it's going to kind of reverse the strength of the way currents are flowing.
That's true, because it's going to start coming down. Cold water is coming.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so we're in an interesting time with a lot of uncertainty about what exactly is going to happen with water temperature and salinity here. But the other aspect of it is the cleanliness of the water, and that comes back to what happens on land. Everything is connected. So when your agriculture industry in your state is actually one that is not full of pesticides and full of chemical fertilizers that are going to run off into your lakes and rivers and streams and down to your ocean, that has an effect. When you have good regulation on pollution in your state, that has an effect. So the clean waters here are also as important as the cold waters. Then the other thing that's interesting in terms of Maine lobster versus Canadian lobster is the seasons in which the fishermen go out and catch lobster. In Maine, the most lobstering happens after the lobsters have shed their shells. So we call that new shell lobster, and the muscle of that lobster it's a bit more. I guess you would say it's been worked. It's tired from shedding that shell. And what that means from a flavor perspective is it's more tender and sweet, whereas a lobster with an old shell, which has had that existing shell for many months, hasn't shed it yet, their meat is going to be much firmer, meatier, and have a totally different taste and texture than what you get from the new shell lobster in Maine. Mm-hmm. So the fact that a lot of Maine lobster is that new shell affects how people think about its flavor and texture as well.
Mm. So Ben, if Maine lobster is the best tasting in the world, what's in top 5? What are the 2, 3, 4, and 5 in your mind?
I would say, there's amazing lobster in Canada, and we do buy and sell Canadian lobster as well. The fisheries in Atlantic Canada and the waters there are also super clean. The environment is well managed. So we love the lobster we get from Canada. It's a different taste profile, but it's still incredibly delicious. Massachusetts lobster is wonderful. We recently opened a restaurant out in Provincetown. We're excited about being able to serve some of the local lobster there. And then, I don't really have a lot to say beyond that. I mean, the different species of lobster.
How about other parts of the world? Are there lobsters in other parts of the world other than America and Canada?
There are totally different species of lobster elsewhere. There's spiny lobsters down south. They're all tail. They don't have claws. I find the tails to be tougher in texture and lack the sweetness that the North American lobster that we know has. And then I'll be honest, there is a lobster over in Europe that's a bit closer to the species we have here in the North Atlantic, and I haven't tried it. But I've heard it smells good.
So I know Luke's is really committed to serving a very special style of, or specific rather, style of lobster roll. Can you talk about how you developed that signature product? And is this the kind of business where you just don't mess with it for a long, long time, or can you experiment with stuff?
Yeah. So our signature roll is all about simplicity. And the reason for that is that the lobster meat is so delicious. I think lobster rolls in a lot of places are considered a way to use subpar lobster meat by mixing it with a bunch of mayonnaise and celery and onions and other stuff. And that's the opposite of what we think a lobster roll should be about. We actually take the absolute best lobster meat that you can get, and we don't want to cover that up with a bunch of sauce or a bunch of other stuff. So we just put it in a warm toasted bun. We prefer not to reheat it because we think that it loses some of its flavor and isn't as great a texture when it's reheated. We put a tiny bit of mayonnaise inside the bun. We don't toss it with mayo in advance. And you can order it without mayo if you choose. And then we just put a little bit of lemon butter on top, a little bit of seasoning, and that's it. And the whole goal is to just feature the lobster as the star, to just have little accents to it that help bring out its sweet flavor and not to cover it up. And in terms of that basic formula for our traditional roll, we haven't changed it once since we came up with it in 2009. We experimented with different spice blends or seasoning blends before we opened, just in Luke's kitchen. We found one that we thought accentuated the taste of the lobster best. We haven't changed it. That's the Luke's Secret Seasoning, and it is what it's been for 15 plus years. All that said, there are some very cool flavors that do go well with lobster. And so we're never going to take the traditional roll off the menu, and it's never not going to be far and away our best seller. But sometimes we experiment with some fun, different sauces and different flavors that are especially cool for folks who come frequently, and we have such a short menu that they just want to try something new. So a cool example of that is the Mike's Hot Honey Roll that we make frequently. A great example was a limited time roll we did where we partnered with Amsom, the Asian American woman-owned company. We made a mala mayo roll using a mala spice recipe from actually our East Village neighbor, the Mala Project. So Emily from Mala Project contributed the recipe to Amsom. Amsom made the sauce. We mixed the sauce with mayo and we served it on our lobster roll, and it was a great addition to the menu. So sometimes we'll go through these kind of limited time offerings where we can do cool partnerships like that and cool flavors, but it will never come close to the sales of the traditional style roll.
Yeah. So how often do you want to do collaborations like that, like once a month or every other month or something like that?
We do pretty infrequently. I mean, we have some that are kind of standards on the menu right now that'll stay on for a long time, like Mike's Hot Honey. But the LTOs that we do, those brand partnerships, typically they roll around once every year or two, and it's just because it's a big lift to do those partnerships, and we just need to make sure that we're ready and we're all aligned, and that it makes sense for all parties that are involved. So it would be fun to do more of them, but we never want to lose focus on executing our traditional role as best as we possibly can. And a lot of times we're just kind of keeping the frills away to make sure we stay focused.
I find the dock to plate supply chain operations kind of fascinating. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. I hear that you're very involved. You helped establish the Tennant's Harbor Fishermen's Co-op. How does it go from boat to restaurant, boat to grocery store, boat to online store sales? Is that really complicated, or just have you nailed it down? Like, is it working like clockwork right now?
I think it'll always be complicated. but there's such huge advantages to it. Typical seafood restaurant, when they need more seafood, they call up a broadline distributor that got that seafood from a wholesaler, that got it from a broker, that got it from a processor, that got the live in from a broker. Like, it's such a long and often broken supply chain. And so the restaurant, and especially the restaurant guest, has no idea where the seafood came from. It's changed hands so many times that may have affected its quality. It's definitely increased its price without adding any value to the guest. And so we prefer to do that ourselves, to have the direct relationship with the fisherman. We can work with the fisherman on things like best handling techniques to reduce the bruising, to reduce the shrink that happens if you handle the lobster too rough. And we can make sure that we're rewarding those fishermen for handling well and reducing shrink and increasing quality. And then we know exactly where everything came from. We can trace it through our own facility, or we can trace it from the fishermen to our partner facility and out the other end, knowing everybody who's touched it in the process. We can get it directly to our shacks, or we can get it directly to our supermarket buyers without it changing hands that many times, without all of the price hikes that happen along the way. And the reason it's complicated is it is a totally nature-dependent resource. So, you might plan to be producing 30,000 pounds of lobster tomorrow, and then suddenly the wind kicks up and the fishermen can't go out and fish, and you have to change all your plans. Mm-hmm. The price of the lobster commodity swings like nothing else I've ever seen. No one knows who controls it, and yet it goes up and down like crazy. And so there's a lot to manage around both the fishermen's expectations and keeping them happy and making sure they're paid fairly, and the end customer expectations and helping them understand why it's so much more expensive than it was last year, or why the price actually went down this year versus the year before. So the big swings like that are tough to manage. But again, because we're closer to the source and we have our handle on the whole supply chain, we can defray some of that crazy price swing and understand where we can and can't exert control over it. So even though it's really hard work, and it distracts us from the work of just like running the best, most profitable restaurants all the time, it's something that pays dividends by ensuring that we have amazing, consistent product and that we get it to people as affordably as we possibly can.
So Ben, you mentioned pricing fluctuations. Is that why, I guess that's why we see market prices instead of the actual prices when we try to buy lobster at the restaurants, right?
That's right. Yeah, the price fluctuates a lot, and a lot of restaurants, they don't want to be constantly reprinting menus, and they're not able to absorb some of those price swings on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. So they just put MP there for market price. And what you typically find in those places is they don't sell that much lobster, because if I go to a restaurant and I don't see a price next to the item, I feel awkward asking. It's weird. And I definitely don't want to be surprised by the bill at the end, so I just don't order that thing. And, we don't feel that we're going to be an approachable place for folks to come enjoy lobster rolls if they don't have a sense of what the price is going to be before they order. And as a company that specializes in lobster, it's kind of our duty to figure out the best price we can offer and be transparent about that. Mm-hmm. So, we try to hold price where it is before going up as long as we can. And that means, there are some times that we make bigger profit, and there are some times that we make lower profits. Mm-hmm. And we try to hang on for stability's sake. And then there are also times where, the price has gotten historically high and our prices have had to go up in response. And then the price comes down the following summer and we can actually lower prices. Mm-hmm. And we love to do that, and we love to, get in front of as many guests as we can and say, like, hey, I know it was a bit of a pinch last summer when you came, but it's more affordable now because we actually respond to what's happening in the lobster market. And restaurant industry wisdom is once you've gone up on price, you never go down. And that's not our attitude at all. We just want to make sure that folks have access to lobster at the best price they can get it.
Yeah. You're so right about that psychology. I also feel the same way. If it says market prices, I'm like, is it $20? Is it $100? Is it $50? Like, I don't want to be. That's, it might as well. Like, if they put just a range, usually $20 to $30, depending on the season, and I'd be like, all right, even if it's 30, maybe I'm okay with it. But I mean, I'll be okay with $65 or something.
Yeah. Some places that are more thoughtful, either they'll have a sign up that says today's market prices are, and then you can see, or they'll just train the server that as they're taking you through the menu and greeting you, they'll say today's lobster price is X. So it's one way to do it, but sometimes you haven't even walked in the door because you're nervous about what that market price might be.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask so many more questions, but the business of lobstering is so interesting. We kind of got into the details of taste of lobster and things like that. But I do want to discuss a little bit, at least marketing. Maybe we can kind of keep it to your original profession, maybe content marketing. You co-authored Real Maine Food. Your website features stories about fishermen and sustainability. As an original writer yourself, is this kind of near and dear to your heart? How important is storytelling to your brand strategy? Do you get involved still? Do you want to get involved, or maybe you want to but you just don't have time to? I'd love to hear a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think, of course, having the best tasting food is paramount for us. We'd be out of business if we didn't serve the best lobster roll. But I think just as much people want to buy a story, and they want to buy a connection to where their food comes from and to the people that were involved along the way. I think a lot of people recognize we've gotten so far removed from where our food comes from that it's damaging us in our body and psychologically. And so when they can find a company that gives them that direct connection back to the folks that harvested that food, that's really valuable to them. And then I think we layer onto that, not just that we have that connection, but the commitment that we have to each of our stakeholders and to the ecosystem that generates their food. So a big piece of that is we're a certified B Corp. So that is a movement that's growing really quickly, started by companies like Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's, but really focused on a holistically good company that's doing right by the community, by their team members, by the environment, and that goes through a rigorous assessment to prove it. So being able to show that we've actually gone through that assessment and given hard evidence about the positive impact that we have on the people and the planet that our seafood touches, that's really meaningful to folks too, and that's a huge part of the brand and the story that we've created. So it's really that, it's the knowledge of the people, the place, the environment, and the ingredients that are necessary in your supply chain to get the perfect lobster roll on the plate, and then the commitment to doing right by all of them, and to being in this for your stakeholders, for your team, for the folks who pick the lobster meat, for the truckers who drive the lobster meat, for, of course, the lobstermen who fish it, and not just to lining your pockets or your investors' pockets. That's something that folks are buying into just as much as they're buying really tasty lobster.
Mm-hmm. Ben, my final question, top two problems giving you a headache right now, and top two priorities you're excited about for the year.
Okay. Top two things that are giving me headaches right now. I think a big thing is just we're in a time of really great economic uncertainty. So we're trying to figure out what our guests' spending habits are going to be like when, the market's down, when things look pretty dark financially, when folks have reined in their spending since last year. And so we need to just figure out the best way to make sure that we are offering value to them. And value doesn't mean cheapness necessarily. It just means when they decide to spend that little bit extra for a lobster roll instead of a salad or a sandwich, that they're having the absolute most amazing experience possible, and it's worthwhile for them. And it may also mean introducing some dishes that are at a more competitive price point, or really helping people understand that we have this amazing sustainable shrimp and crab on our menu that's less expensive than lobster, for when they really want that seafood fix, but they just can't quite get themselves to jump for the lobster roll. So that's a big piece of it. And what else is another big headache for us? I don't want to refer to it as a headache because it's such a great opportunity, but something that we think a lot about is we are opening new locations on both coasts of the country, and that means bringing in new teams, which we're super excited about. But what's always challenging as you get bigger is the ability to make sure that you are bringing folks onto your team in the right way, that they are learning everything about the ethos, the core values, the vision, the mission of our brand, that they get to know who Luke is and who I am and what we're about, and that they feel special. That's really the biggest thing. Like, our team needs to understand that even though I live in Maine and they live in Santa Monica and we don't get to see each other, that I understand how critically important what they do is to the success of our company and what their ideas can contribute to the success of this company. And when we bring people onto the team who don't get to meet Luke, who don't get to meet me, we need to figure out how our systems can work so that those teammates really, really do understand how valuable they are to us and how special they are and how much their contributions to Luke's really mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess then priorities are, one of them is the new locations, and the other one I imagine just the frozen sections for the grocery stores.
Quick new priorities. I'll give you asked for two, I'll give you three. One is our new restaurant locations. We recently opened in Santa Monica, and of course, that area went through the devastation of those wildfires, and we were there, in time to be able to support some of those communities with some food donations. But, it's really important for us that those communities recover and that we're there for them. And so we're hoping to be able to welcome more and more folks in that Santa Monica location. We opened in the West Village in New York City just last month, so that's a big priority for us. And we're working on a big new restaurant location here in Portland, the revival of a traditional place on the waterfront called Dry Dock. So those are some of our restaurant priorities right now. We also are focused on growing our CPG business, our prepared seafood meals in grocery stores like Whole Foods, Hannaford, Big Y, a lot of places that you can find us in the frozen seafood section. So that's like lobster ravioli, lobster mac and cheese, lobster cakes, twin lobster tails. We're trying to just find more supermarkets who want to bring in those products and continue to innovate new products to fill those shelves. And then the last one is our nonprofit, Lift All Boats. This is a program that we created because we realized that it can be really daunting and nearly impossible for folks who don't come from lobstering backgrounds to enter that industry. And because of that, the lobstermen who are out there today are facing a workforce shortage, and they don't know how to connect to some of these young people who are from different communities and different backgrounds. So what Lift All Boats does is we go to public schools, we talk to folks from non-fishing backgrounds, and we let them know that we can help them actually get through the student licensing process, and we can teach them to lobster, and we can prepare them for this career in a way that they would never have been able to without a program like ours. So Lift All Boats is starting its 4th year. We're going to have 30 students on the water this summer, and we're super excited to keep executing that program and to spend that time with those amazing kids.
That's wonderful. I'm glad we heard that ferry in the background. That made our conversation even more authentic. Ben is coming to us from Portland, Maine. So that was a ferry that's going where, Ben?
Going off to Peaks Island.
Peaks Island. Okay. I think I remember taking a ferry from Portland to Yarmouth in Nova Scotia. That was like an 8-hour. Quite an experience that was. We went there for whale watching, and that part of the world is just beautiful, so green. And Ben Conniff of Luke's Lobster, thank you for sharing your journey with me.
Thank you so much for having me here. This was great.